Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, I hope that you took your refreshment and that you're ready with us to continue in the morning session. Now we are entering to the SME Sustainable Enterprise panel. For those ones who were here when I started to speak, we say in Czech, the repetition is the mother of wisdom. So let me please repeat what is the SME Sustainable Enterprise panel about. We are going to discuss the SMEs community recovery from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and transition toward a greener and more digital economy. Debate also how to continue to support the enterprise ecosystem in that process. Also, we will discuss whether radical economic or public policy reform is required in order to meet our shared goals. We will do this with the help of our Sustainable Enterprise panel of experts and you, the delegates here present or being online. And for you who are here now present, please don't be afraid, don't hesitate, come closer to us because we really want you to be involved in the debate. Please come to the first lines. You from the back. Please, don't make me wait. Thank you very much, because we would love to see you also. Thank you. There's a pioneer. Thank you very much. Thank you once again for your cooperation. Also, thank you for those ones on the other side to come closer. We will ask our panel to assess progress since last year, looking in particular at how the polycrisis has affected SMEs' investment in and action towards green growth and digitalisation. And this year, we will hear from two inspiring young entrepreneurs about how they have been impacted by the policies designed to favor recovery and transition and what they would like to see in the forthcoming SME relief package. But before we do that, let's hear from Hubert Gamsgen. Thank you, Hubert, for coming back, Deputy Director General of DG Growth. Thank you.
Hello, and once more, good morning. I will not be back in all the sessions. This is special because it's a Sustainable Enterprise panel. And this is actually a fixture. It has become a fixture in our program of the SME Assembly. And I'm very happy, therefore, to be here with you. We've just heard from Minister Joseph Sikela and from Commissioner Thierry Breton how they, at the political level, intend to support for SMEs. We also have, I think it's always very interesting to hear from entrepreneurs. So Petri Salminen gave us his view of, where entrepreneurs stand. The SME Assembly this year, its focus is sustainability, resilience, and digitalization. And for me, it is very clear that all these three elements are very much linked to each other. And I'm sure our expert panel today will also make this very clear. But I want to refer to what happened yesterday also. Professor Luc Soete gave us his view on resilience in the Schumpeterian way. And he made very clear that a lot of innovation, and innovation is what Europe needs very much, a lot of innovation comes from small and medium-sized enterprises. And this is why it's great to have in this panel today eminent scientists and two young entrepreneurs that are here with us because they will show us, their perspective again. And from exchanging views, this is the great thing about the SME Assembly. There are many views here present, online or in the room, and by discussing, we can discover new aspects. And that's why I'm very grateful for all of you to make yourself available today. And I'm sure we will have a very fruitful and interesting discussion. And I hope very much also a lively discussion. Because we need scientific advice to develop the right policies. We need, because our policies have to be based on evidence. And scientists, one of the roles of scientists is to bring the evidence to the table and tell us what is the real situation. At the same time, we also need radical views, and that's why we have the two young entrepreneurs with us. Because you have to steer up, you have to criticize us also. You have to tell us what we should do and have to do better. And be open, be frank. Because for us, this is also a reality check that is needed, in particular in times of crisis. And I'm counting in particular on the two of you to do that. When we had the first Sustainable Enterprise panel, we were in a pandemic. In the second year, we thought, we're hopefully nearing the end of it. But then, the third year come, and we are in another crisis. And the war against Ukraine and all its implications with regard to energy prices, but also the inflation, the disruption of supply chains, the more difficult access to raw materials, they affect all of us, but they affect in particular the entrepreneurs. For them, it's really also the second big crisis, one after the other, that makes their life much more complicated than we hoped it would be. Now, we also have to, of course, address the short term and look for what we can do quickly and what is necessary to be done quickly. But we also have to think about the longer term. What can we have to continue our efforts in terms of how to fight climate change. The change of climate patterns, again, represents a challenge and continues to be a challenge. It hasn't gone away because we are faced with other crises. I also want to ask from all of you to think, what can we do in the short term and in the longer term to facilitate the life of SMEs, of small and medium-sized enterprises. The Commission is preparing a relief package for SMEs. And it's very important that we get it right in this package. So it's very important that we use also this panel and the SME Assembly to listen to you, to hear from you, what is needed, what are the best ways that how we can relieve your life, make your life easier, and make it easier for you to do business, to innovate, to flourish. Reaching a sustainable element of enterprise is also important, not only in the short term, but also in the mid to longer term. And this discussion will certainly also help us to see clearer in that respect. The issue of sustainable enterprise is something that we really have to look after in any case. I wish you all very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hubert, for this policy context to open this session. This session will be led by a woman, surprisingly. She is a social innovator, large group facilitator, intercultural psychologist, and Theory U practitioner. She supports systems and individuals in societal transformation and complex challenges. Please clap for Karolina Iva.
Thank you so much, Laila. A warm welcome on our behalf. This is the third Sustainable Enterprise panel. I'm very glad to be joined today on stage by our panelists. And if we could have our colleagues who are joining us online also join us here, how wonderful. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to Alfredo De Masis. Alfredo is a professor in entrepreneurship and family business and the founding director of Center for Family Business Management at the Free University of Bolzano, Italy. Welcome.
Good morning.
Who is also with us is Uta Stefan. Uta Stefan is a professor in entrepreneurship and an expert in psychology of entrepreneurship at King's Business School at King's College London. Welcome, wonderful to have you today with us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
We also have Anis Sauka, who is professor and the director of the Center of Sustainable Business at Stockholm School of Economics in Riga, Latvia. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
Hello, Anis. We also, Hubert, as you said, we have our two entrepreneurs joining our panel and making our panel complete. And this is Christina Herbert, and Christina is the co-founder and CEO of Blue Lobster, bridging the disconnect between sustainable fishermen and the customers, and working towards incentivizing sustainable fishing practices. And we have Benedetta Spatini, a co-founder and CEO of Water Eco. And Water Eco is driven by the ambition to provide the most ethical and sustainable alternatives on the market of everyday life needs. So it's wonderful to have the 5 of us here joining the in-person and online audience who are also with us here in person in Prague and watching online. And today's panel will be composed of 2 questions I will present to the panelists. And after each of these questions, we will have an opportunity to extend our microphones to our audiences in person and online for you to inspire and invigorate our conversations by your questions. And at the end, we will also have an opportunity for a moment of audience reflection and engagement. And whom I would like to welcome as well with me today, co-hosting the session, are my 2 colleagues, Gerardo de Lusenberger, and Gerardo will be our connection between the panel and the audience. So whenever you have questions, Gerardo will be the one with the mic, so the person in power. And Gerardo is also the person who has access to online questions, so we'll be keeping an eye to inspire and inform us by these questions. We also have Sabine Söder, who is sat on the other side with her iPad, and she's going to be doing graphic recording, capturing the core patterns and trends that we will be able to discuss and surface. And it's great to be with the 3 of us co-hosting this session, as the 3 of us are also entrepreneurs, you know, so being part of this panel and this conversation, this wider conversation about the SME relief package. This is something that impacts us, and we know many entrepreneurs that have been supported by the pandemic relief measures, and this has made the difference. To many of them, this has made the difference of make and break, and many of them are enterprises and entrepreneurs that have been around for decades, and still, you know, like these are the moments where we need to stick together and support one another. So, Sabine, I managed to introduce you a second ago, and this being the 3rd panel, we also have the opportunity to look back at last year's panel that Ute and Alfredo and Anis also joined, and look at the graphic recording from last year. And Sabine, when you and I were looking at it last year, when you and I were looking at it yesterday, at the last year's graphic recording, and we were connecting back to this, what was the conversation about? What has become really visible for us is that last year, you know, like the panel of researchers and practitioners, that there is this generational shift, the generational shift that not only makes an innovative and sustainable enterprise and value-driven economy like slowly becoming a lived reality, but we're actually one step further already. There is reporting and there is policy that's supporting that. And I remember a couple of years ago, you know, like we were wondering with the team of the SME Assembly, you know, like, are we there to speak about sustainable enterprise and to speak about value-driven economy? And we had this feeling, you know, like maybe it's too early, maybe it's just, you know, like a trend on the fringes, maybe not yet. And now here we are on stage talking about that, and there is a shift that's happening. So exactly, you know, like this is the question I would like to ask, and I would like to go to Alfredo first. So if we could have colleagues online here join us on screen. Wonderful. Alfredo, I wonder, in the year between the last assembly and this assembly, what have been the questions that have been animating your work and your research?
Thank you. Yes, I think, you know, what has changed basically is that, you know, when we discussed about these topics in our previous assembly, we were all focusing on one single crisis, right? We were in the middle of an important adversity. But now, you know, as already been mentioned, you know, we have been experiencing a number of other adversities, right? You know, like the rising cost of energy, like the inflation, like, you know, the labor and talent shortage, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, etc. So this is based on my research and also based on the conversation that, within my center I'm having with a number of entrepreneurs from SMEs. This has somehow changed, the importance that we attach to some topics. And I have identified 4 main things that I want to briefly present to you. The first thing is that sustainability, without any doubt, continues to become very important, especially with respect to the environment. But what has changed, in my view, is that in the early stage, we were talking about sustainability mainly in relation to the willingness of doing so, the willingness of entrepreneurs. So we were very much focused on, sensitizing, stimulating the entrepreneurs to espouse sustainable goals. Now I think we have changed towards, some attention more dedicated to the ability of sustainability. I mean, the key priority is how can we enable the SMEs to become sustainable? How we can enable them to, transform their business model in a sustainable way. And I'm currently actually working on understanding sustainability issues and sustainability practices in the context of family businesses that, as you probably know, are the most ubiquitous form of business organization in Europe, where nearly 85% of businesses basically fall within this definition. And, very recently, I published a study on this topic, sustainability practices of family and non-family firms, where we show with a very robust data from 2032 companies, firms, that family firms struggle more than their non-family counterparts when it comes to pollution prevention, when it comes to green supply chain management, and when it comes to green product development. So sustainability, continues to become important, but with this change. Another topic that, in my view, has been gaining importance, especially in the current context where, innovation is more and more an imperative for any SMEs, is the topic of women involvement. I mean, despite there are strong theoretical reasons showing or arguing that, being inclusive on this dimension of diversity is associated with many benefits, still in Europe, especially in some countries rather than in others, but overall, I think, we can do more. There is room for improvement in terms of involving women. And again, I recently published in an academic journal called Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal, a study based on 287 Belgian SMEs, where we show that having female directors, so having women involved in the boards, especially when these women belong to the owning family of the company, has strong, positive effects on innovation. So, having women involved in the boards of SMEs has a positive effect on the innovation, which means that women somehow act as a catalyst of innovation. And so I think we need more efforts put in, let's say, facilitating these processes. A third important point that was subject somehow to change is the topic of digital transition, especially in this case, the digital transition to millennials. Because we know that we are in an era where the generation of baby boomers who have inherited or founded their companies, their firms, is now going to hand over it to the millennials. And we have actually been at the University of Bolzano, we have been working on a funded research project where the key focus was to interview and observe some SMEs to understand how the transition intersects, how the digital transition intersects with the generational transitions to millennials. And, the project is still ongoing, but I can already share a few preliminary results. What we discovered is basically that, millennials are, of course, very different from the previous generations. And so, it means that you need to really adjust and change many of the approach. So also questioning many of the things many of the assumptions that we are used to consider. Another important thing that emerged is that in those cases where this digital transition is working, there were intergenerational alliances. that are very important. We observed cases where, for instance, the next generation was mentoring the previous generation, like reverse mentoring, which means that basically, you know, you have a bidirectional flow, not only from the senior to the next generation, but also from the next to the senior, a bidirectional flow of knowledge and of mentoring approach. Another thing is that, you know, of course, it's important when you need to master digital technologies to have an overall understanding of the technology, but then especially for an SMEs, it becomes very important to rely on very specific competencies, and so to rely on third parties with expertise. And we know that especially for an SMEs, this can be problematic because SMEs are quite closed, and you know, their openness sometimes can become an issue. And finally, another things that emerged from this project is that there are still some important sectorial differences among firms. So firms that were already doing going digital before this transition wave started are proceeding with a very fast rate, very quickly, are running, whereas others in more traditional industries, like, you know, many craft SMEs, for instance, SMEs in the craftsmanship industries, are lagging behind. So there are also some important industrial sectorial differences that need to be taken into account. The last, to conclude, point or change that I observed refers to the topic of resilience. Of course, during the pandemic, we were talking, discussing, and trying, you know, to catalyze our attention to resilience. But what I have seen is that most of the knowledge that we have about organizational resilience is a knowledge that has been developed by considering an event-based or episodic approach. So basically, we started organizations that were facing a single adversity. Now we live in an era where we have this so-called polycrisis, right? We have multiple adversities. And I feel it's more and more important to move from this episodic or event-based view of resilience to a more dynamic view of resilience, where we observe what an organization does when it goes through multiple adversities. And again, I have a study which is currently under review, where we studied longitudinally an organization that went through 5 different adversities. And what we discovered is that between one adversity and the other, there are actually some learning dynamics that occur. And there is something that for now we are calling organizational fortitude, which is an approach that some organizations have and that reflect their propensity to stand resolute, to access resource reserves, and also to gain support by values shared with other stakeholders. And this fortitude is important to understand, you know, how you can reinforce and reinvigorate resilience, especially in a polycrisis environment. So I hope that there will be more and more work and attention in understanding, you know, resilience from a multi-crisis perspective.
Thank you so much, Alfredo. Ute, I wonder what it is that you observed in the last year. What has attracted your attention?
So I think there's obviously many trends, but I want to highlight 3 things. First, that I think our understanding of sustainability is changing, it is broadening. Then all these crises, which are less urgent, but possibly more severe at the moment. And then what we've learned from the last crisis, from the pandemic, that we should hold on to. So in terms of sustainability, it's been quite striking that over the past years, we've broadened the understanding of sustainability from merely considering environmental and resource concerns to also including diversity, inclusion, and all these aspects. And that's important because we know from large amounts of research that diversity is generally good for resilience, including in economic systems and on a small scale within the company. So that's a good trend. And of course, there are big differences when you think about the crisis. So we know that actually more diverse, for lack of a better word, so more sustainable companies can deal better with crisis. Partly because they're more embedded locally. So in times of crisis, they can leverage better networks, more sustainable networks, and can weather crisis.
But notwithstanding, we're clearly in an era of polycrisis, and they are particularly severe for SMEs who have less resources typically to rely on. And I think it's really critical to understand that COVID, we were able to mobilize a lot of support because it was very clearly a very urgent crisis, whereas now crises are more slow burning, so to speak. But they're even more severe because they're both on the demand side. We have a cost of living crisis. That means customer demand is suppressed. And at the same time, we have a supply side crisis in terms of the cost of doing business is clearly going up dramatically. And there is particularly severe for SMEs, a difficulty of accessing skilled human capital. And that's problematic because for a region like the European Union, one of the main competitive advantages of SMEs is surely to do with productivity. It's not necessarily the resource intensiveness, so it's kind of being smart in how things are done. And that's obviously where digitalization also plays a big role. And there is actually an even more less obvious, let's say, a less obvious underlying crisis in terms of COVID. We're only now understanding the severe long-term health effects that COVID has in terms of disabilities and the strains it's putting on healthcare systems. And what it means is that there is a hidden healthcare, health and well-being crisis that further diminishes productivity, and particularly so for SMEs who, unlike big companies who can implement employee assistance programs, who don't have the capacity to do so. And actually, this COVID crisis, in our own research, led a large study across 25 countries, over 5,000 entrepreneurs during the pandemic. And what we saw was that the health and well-being is not just a nice-to-have factor, it's actually the entrepreneur's own health and well-being that determines the very sustainability of the enterprise. Sustainability in will it exist in a year's time, understood in this time. There is hope as well. It all sounds very doom and gloom, but there is hope in terms of we have important lessons from the last crisis in terms of resilience. One of the things that stands out, and when we come to policy recommendations, there's actually something we can do about it. What stands out is that in crisis, it's important to look for new opportunities to pivot business models, but it's also extremely hard in a crisis to do that. So there is an opening for support there. And I just want to end on the challenge. So overall, we're in a situation where we clearly have cost pressures on SMEs in particular, but we have to transition to a more sustainable economy. And I want to just leave you with that research, including my own, shows that it's not necessarily a trade-off, that actually the two can be aligned and you can become more resilient, more diverse, more productive by becoming more sustainable.
Thank you so much. Over to Professor Anis Sauka.
Somewhat better position because many things has been already said by Ure and Alfredo. But still, three issues also from me that are hopefully somewhat complementary to what my colleagues just said. The first one is about the tax evasion, the issue of the shadow economy that was highlighted also in the previous year, and basically we are talking about the rise of the shadow economy. This is not a phenomenon that is very easy to measure, but still, according to our estimates, the shadow economy is around 25% of the GDP in Latvia and close to 20% in Lithuania and Estonia, and we do observe increasing trend likely also in the other EU countries where I would say migration and economic downturn amongst the drivers of the shadow economy. And given the high uncertainty that comes with the high inflation, the energy crisis, the Russia war in Ukraine, still the COVID pandemic influence, which I think still exists, it does not really allow for positive forecasts in the terms of the decrease of the shadow economy. Yet, as we all know, we will need more money for security, for education, for innovation, for health, for many other issues. And I really do hope that the tax increase will not be the main or the only mechanism to compensate for the increase of the shadow economy in the European Union countries, as SMEs will be those that will feel it most, I think. So that is the first issue. The second issue, I mean, getting out of crisis stronger is a nice expression, and we use it quite often, but I think you will agree with me that it also requires a resource, right? And one crucial resource to actually achieve this is a human capital, both availability and the quality. And I mean, as Ude already said, it is about the processes, it is about efficiency and productivity. So, I mean, hopefully these are not the robots who are doing it yet. So the humans are the ones who are involved. And in that respect, this is still area of concern, especially for SMEs that are perhaps relatively less targeted by training programs, at least in country where I come from, but also other initiatives. And I think it's not only about the human capital development in the private sector, but also in the public sector, because efficiency of the government is essential, really, for development and the implementation of any policies, including SMEs related policies. So especially in the context of crisis, where new approaches should be considered and adapted, the efficiency and how smart the policymakers are is essential issue, I think. And third, and I will stop here with this, and this is nothing new, unfortunately, the Green Deal versus energy independence question that is of major importance, because we indeed do talk about the Green Deal this year much more in relation to the energy independence than last year. Last year we much more highlighted the Green Deal as such. And as I see it from my own country's perspective, well, some progress has been achieved with regards to, for instance, planning who is responsible, discussing horizontal approach in the government, and so on and so forth. Yet many questions are still unclear, including having sort of a clear action plan linked with the costs, with financial aspects, and the timeline, and in the scope of today's discussion, also communication to the SMEs on the benefits, as well as supporting SMEs to switch to the greener, more sustainable approach, something that we did discuss previous year, but I think this is also a major issue today. And just for the context, we are running the fiscal sentiment index in Latvia annually for 7-8 years, basically asking main foreign investors in the country who has come to Latvia, what are their key concerns? And we also asked them in 2002 to assess the current efforts of the policymakers in Latvia to implement the Green Deal strategy in the country. And we got the grade 2.2 out of 5, where 5 is excellent. So now still way to go in Latvia, but I'm pretty sure that also in other Central European countries and even more developed Western economies, this might still be an issue. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Christina, both you and Benedetta, you represent entrepreneurs, and I'm really curious, what has last year been about you and your partners and all the supply chain you're engaging with? I'm curious what happened there.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some great things that have been said about the trends, about digitalization and resources, and how mental health is affecting companies. But I'm going to get into like the details of what our startup has been going through internally, and then also some of the external things that have been affecting us. So internally, we've definitely jumped on board of this digitalization trend. It's something we've wanted to do for a really long time, but we basically started up our operations just before the pandemic hit, and the unit economics meant that we internalized our value chain. And just to give everybody an idea of what we're doing, we have a digital platform that's connecting sustainable fishermen with their customers, cutting out the middlemen and making a direct connection from the harbor to the kitchen. So up until this year, we owned the entire supply chain. It meant we had a team of 15 people. We had vans, drivers, packers. We were filleting in-house. We had a facility in Copenhagen. We would bring the fish, and then we would pack it and distribute it out. And since the beginning of this year, in February, we actually became completely digital, and we outsourced all of the logistics, all of the packing, and we partnered our way into being a completely digital platform, which was really exciting for us because it means that we're able to scale geographically much faster, and we can have a bigger impact faster, and adapt to new markets and new setups by working with the existing infrastructure. So I think that's been something that's really exciting for us. It also meant that our team has become much more lean. We were 15, and now we're 5 people, focusing on tech development and business development. So I think being a lean company in these times that we're getting into, now that the recession is coming or here in some cases, it's a really good place to be in, because we're not spending so much money, and we can adapt quickly, and be innovative without spending a lot of money in the process. So that's kind of what we've been up to internally, and then externally, I think we've seen some really sad effects of climate change and the price of fuel rising. In our area around Copenhagen, we've seen the sea basically become a dead zone. The cod quotas, which was main sustenance for the fishermen, they dropped by 85% at the beginning of the year, and we've seen most of our fishermen who were full-time fishermen, now we don't have a single fisherman who is a full-time fisherman. They've all had to take jobs on land because the sea is very polluted. We've been destroying it with unsustainable fishing methods. It's just, it's not a viable job for the fishermen anymore. And we also shouldn't be eating the fish that's coming out of this part of the sea because there's so much pollution and the populations aren't very healthy. And I think fish in particular is a common resource for all of us, and the quotas are something that's regulated down from the EU level. So it's something that we really need to be conscientious about, like what pollutants are entering the sea from the land use that we're doing, and how are the quotas distributed. So that's something that we really need to be looking into. And then on another very practical level, we've seen the fishermen, with the fuel prices going up, they're going out less and less frequently, but actually this has been affecting more so the larger vessels that are not necessarily the unsustainable ones, but often they are. So the bigger boats, they'll go out for many days at a time, and when they're using the bottom trawling, it's nets that hang down, and they're weighted, and that uses a lot of fuel to drag across. So they've been kept in, they're having many less fishing days because of those prices going up. It's also affecting the smaller fishermen that we're working with that are using low impact fishing gear, but not as much because they're using less fuel. Yes, and yeah, we've also seen smaller orders from customers coming in because when you go into a crisis situation, luxury goods like fish is often one of the first things that gets cut. So yeah, those are kind of the internal and external things that we've been facing. So some good with digitalization, and some that we just really, as a society, need to look at and figure out what are we going to do with our common resources. And also with the ocean, it's not only about the fish that's coming out, it's also about how our world is functioning. And once the sea stops being in a good shape, then we're going to stop seeing ocean flows, and we're going to have catalysts into catastrophic situations with climate change.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. Benedetta, you're a co-founder and a CEO, but your own organization is not the only one where you're active. Would you like to share with us from the level of collaboration of organizations?
Yeah, sure. I co-founded Whataico, which is an innovative startup, and we built a platform. It's a marketplace, and at the beginning we were connecting brands, sustainable and ethical brands, to final consumers. And actually, with this crisis and polycrisis, we actually got an opportunity, which was like listening to our clients. We actually opened a new channel, which was the B2B channel, because retailers, like very small shops, independent shops, were, facing this crisis, and they were in huge difficulties, starting from, the time they had to invest in scouting brands. And so we have got like 4,000 highly selected sustainable products, and we started receiving a lot of requests to buy our products in bulk. And so just to have, one-stop shop for all the, the scouting process. And also what we saw with Whataico was like a huge need of, this digital transition. So we are currently working with around 200 European brands. And also, like, we are, of course, offering our platform to sell the products B2C and B2B. But now we have implemented like a lot of IT services, starting from CEO landing page or advertisement, or everything around, the digital transition, like how to communicate with clients, because we saw that a lot of brands were doing like great jobs, like in terms of, the supply chain and how they upcycled product, or how they were into circular economy. But then there was this missing piece, the puzzle, that there was a missing piece of the puzzle, that was the digital transition. So now we also offer like a lot of digital services for our brands. But as you said, I'm also representing CNA, which is the main association representing the Italian SMEs. And we are talking a lot about, how to help and support small and medium enterprises in Italy, and also not only in Italy. And what I would love to underline is actually the definition of small and medium enterprises, which is a business that has at maximum or less of 250 employees. But I think that the problem is in this definition and in the interpretation of this definition, because if we look at a company that has around 200 employees, they've got some needs and challenges which are totally different comparing to a small company as we are running. So the same applies to the measures and tools to support startups, because if we talk about disruptive startups, like, to me it really sounds like Silicon Valley thing, and I don't want to say that we don't have disruptive startups in Europe, because we have them, but still, are those disruptive startups the majority of the startups we are running here in Europe? Maybe not. And so I would love and suggest, like, to the European Commission and everybody else, like today, also talking about the fact that we have to consider and take into consideration the different sizes of the businesses in order to try to support them properly.
Thank you so much. We're going to open to our audience for your questions. If we could have Anis and Alfredo on our screens as well, so you can join us in answering questions. And Gerardo is right there, ready to take your questions. So if there's any question, I can see a question over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I would like to relate to what Petri Salminen from SME United said this morning in his opening speech, and emphasized skills, entrepreneurial skills. That's what we need, and that's what we need to develop. And to give you the background of my question, I'm a professor of innovation management and sustainability from Germany, and we bring together students and SMEs, business, to work jointly on green business and develop sustainable business models. And we are one of the finalists of this year's European Enterprise Award in the section of sustainable transitions. So our understanding is that we need different skills for doing sustainable businesses than the classical entrepreneurial skills. But I like to learn from your views. What is your perspective, especially from our practitioners? Do you think doing a sustainable business requires different entrepreneurial skills than it used to be? And what would be the difference? So that would be very interesting to know.
Thank you so much. Benedetta, Christina, Who of you would like to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, I can share my view, and I totally agree. Yes, I think we need to develop new skills. We need to be definitely more flexible. And well, we know the word greenwashing, right? And we usually associate greenwashing with practice that is malicious. So I want to, tell that I'm, green and my business is, sustainable, and I'm doing that on purpose while my business model is actually not. But I do feel like there's also let's say, good greenwashing or, not malicious greenwashing, which comes from startups or companies that are saying that they are sustainable, but they are not actually data-driven. And being data-driven in the sustainability field, it's really tough. We need to develop skill to know how to collect data, how to analyze data, and then we have to, to justify why we say we are sustainable. And this is a long process. It's not something that you can jump on and then you are ready to, manage this. So yes, I do believe we have to develop new skills. And I love the fact that you are working and putting together and creating this bond between university and SMEs. I love it. I think it's a future.
Thank you so much. Uda, I know you would like to add.
First of all, congratulations on being a finalist. And I think it's a really good question. I just want to reinforce that sometimes when I work with SMEs, it's also clear that it's almost not top of mind that they don't know what they're already doing. So it's not. So there is something to be said for skills development, but there's also something to be said for awareness raising and helping SMEs to understand all the good things they're already doing and how they can scale those up, rather than saying, here's a whole new set of themes you need to engage with. Kind of start with what competencies there are already, and then kind of think through how to scale that.
Thank you so much. Anis, exactly, there we go. Let's go to you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Yeah. Maybe just to briefly compliment to what just Ute said, and of course agreeing that skills are needed. I do not think, however, that sustainable businesses or social businesses need different type of skill sets. I think that the skill sets are more or less the same for doing the business. They are more industry specific or more context specific. What is important, however, is I think this different mindset that is of importance in social or sustainable business, and with the right mindset and plus the skills, then this can happen. Otherwise, with only good intentions in the social business or sustainable business, unfortunately, it's not going to be sustainable. So this is at least the evidence I've seen in my research and also practice.
Thank you so much. Alfredo.
Yes, if I can, I fully agree with Arnis. I think, sustainability is, of course, a very multidisciplinary topic. And of course, you need a very broad set of skills. But as Arnis said, the skill set, the skills are those. What is, in my view, is a shame is that, too often when we deal with sustainability issues, training, education, we focus too much on certification, how you get certificates, how you can, report in the correct way sustainability and things like this. But we forget instead that, as Arnis put it in a very clear way, sustainability is a mindset, is a disposition. And so I think that especially, with the next generation that, by the way, research shows is much more inclined to be sustainable as compared to the previous one, it's very important that we focus on this. So more on the disposition, on the mindset, how we can. So I think this sort of training should be more inspirational rather than, aiming to change the type of skills that you need to run a sustainable enterprise.
Thank you so much. Christina.
Yeah, I want to kind of echo what everybody just said. I think it's not necessarily different skill sets. I think being an entrepreneur is about taking risks and innovative thinking, and it's about a mindset. And I think what we're seeing, especially coming out of a crisis, is companies that are really building sustainability into their business model. It's not an add-on. It's not something extra that we need to think about separately than the business model. The business models that are coming up now, it needs to be a core part. And I think it's kind of dangerous to keep it separate because we need companies that are improving the world, especially right now.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I would like to move on to the second round of the panel and place the second question in the center. On September 19th, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced the SME relief package. And this assembly is a chance for all speakers, and as a matter of fact, for all the delegates in the audience as well, to have conversations and contribute and co-shape how this package will look like. And our panel is a beginning of this conversation, but it is a conversation that's going to be happening for the next 2 days and beyond that. So really a warm encouragement to all of that, to see it as that. And I'm curious if you were to bring forward 3 main measures that you actually believe would support a sustainable enterprise ecosystem, what would you like to see reflected in the SME relief package? And Alfredo, we're going to begin with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think the first, let's say, policy recommendations centers around these questions that I asked myself. How can an SME understand whether its own business model is sustainable? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we assume, they know. They are able to understand that. And also, how can they innovate in a sustainable way their business model if it's not sustainable? So I think the first line of measures could be, should be aimed to guide SMEs through the journey that they need to, undertake in order to develop a sustainable business model. So helping them to assess whether they have a sustainable business model or not, and if not, developing this. And of course, practically speaking, this might mean, for instance, supporting the launch of, programs for sustainable development, like multi-generational programs, maybe some of those especially targeted to specific types of SMEs that are particularly struggling. At the beginning, I was mentioning that, for instance, family-owned SMEs very often struggle with when dealing with the green environmental practices. So, it could be programs aimed to target SMEs in the more traditional sectors, like the craft one, that of course represent a value in terms of value tradition for Europe overall. This also means, so this is one policy recommendation. A second one, after having been read what is going to be prepared in this, let's say, relief package, I think that we should aim to go beyond financials. What do I mean? I mean that it's not enough to create financial bids for projects, as SMEs are often not able to access those bids. Yet, paradoxically, they are those type of organizations that would benefit most from those bids. Mm-hmm. And so I think, it would be wise, from my perspective, to help SMEs in designing, green, digital, sustainable project, and also in guiding them to present then projects. Because again, I think an assumption that we make is that they are able and capable, and they have the resources for preparing and for applying for a financial bid. So going beyond financial is another point. The third point relates to my view of sustainability as an ongoing process that intersects with generational transitions. And so here I would be ideally very, very happy to see measures that somehow incentivize and stimulate the bridge of the senior and the next generation. In many countries across Europe, we know that young generations are not given the attention they deserve. I think that, for instance, launching, incentivizing the reverse mentoring, intergenerational alliances, and this could happen in a number of possible ways, from vouchers aimed, to offer advice that can help organizations to to stimulate, to develop these intergenerational alliances, to other means, but something really specific on, let's say, building a strong bridge between the generation, because I think that this bridge, especially now that everything is more complex, more uncertain and more difficult, will be very, very important, because I strongly believe that in order to succeed in the future, Europe will need both the expertise and the wise approach of the senior generation and the enthusiasm and attitude toward innovation of the next generation.
Thank you so much. Ute, what would you like to see reflected in the relief package?
So I think there is a case for relief in terms of resources. There is something to be said around enabling SMEs to pivot and explore new opportunities. And then there's also, thirdly, something to be said about addressing and overcoming constraints of smallness, because small businesses are not just like little big businesses. Mm-hmm. So in terms of relief, I think we need to be mindful that we already see that SMEs are failing. Some of the relief measures are kind of offering more debt, yet SMEs are still paying down COVID loans in many cases. So there's clearly something to be said for a relief package in terms of financial resources to see them through the bottom, especially for those who are energy intensive. But it's not just applying a relief plaster, so to speak. It's also pairing that with enabling transition to be more sustainable. And I think that's where enabling SMEs to pivot and explore new opportunities come in. I think, Benedetta, you had a nice example of how listening to customers actually allowed you to offer a new service. And that's what we've been really seeing at scale in our global study, that's what happened to the resilient SMEs were the ones that kind of looked to change in terms of become more sustainable, become more diverse, inclusive, but paired that with listening to customers, so with real market demand. And that's really where SMEs are different from large businesses. We know from research that for large businesses, kind of pushing through regulation for them to become more sustainable works. For SMEs, they are much less sensitive to threats of regulation or kind of even tax incentives. They are really responsive to customer need. But that's, again, I'm very aware of that, easier said than done, because when you're running an SME, the one thing you don't have is time often, and you don't have, you're firefighting, and you don't have the scope to go out and see what your customers might be doing. So I think there is something, tried and tested methods around opportunity vouchers, which, could be giving SMEs basically a license to go away for a short time from their business, and a structured framework of how to get to realizing and accessing, understanding customer needs, and how to pair that with sustainability. There's also, that's perhaps more short-term, there's really good experiences with kind of growth accelerator programs. So, of course, we need startups, but we also need existing SMEs to scale and to become more productive and more sustainable in the process of doing so. And again, it's not necessarily a skills gap, so to speak, but it is giving SME entrepreneurs, owners, the freedom to explore, to network with others, to learn from each other, and kind of the time to reflect and kind of plan where their business could go, and giving them the tools around leadership, sustainability, all of that. And finally, I think in terms of overcoming constraints of smallness, I just want to highlight two examples. So I already talked about the hidden COVID crisis, the mental health and health toll that COVID is still taking in terms of long COVID. We've largely underestimated how prevalent that is. And what we see in many countries is actually because the healthcare systems are so stretched that employees go to employee assistance programs that their companies are providing. SMEs can't afford to put on, by and large, employee assistance programs that would offer, mental health services or coaching or things like that. So there's something to be said for shared services. So if you bundle an offering and allow many SMEs to tap into that, and employee assistance programs are a good example, because there is no competition involved. It doesn't matter, and there's confidentiality there. So I think the idea that can you bundle services and allow SMEs to access them in a shared manner. And I think the other point to consider is that SMEs are often very locally embedded, even when they're digitally operating in many different markets. But that's also their strength. But what we see in terms of public procurement, often SMEs cannot bid for that because they are not, not seen as robust, as reliable, too risky maybe. So could there be something when we think about public procurement that we have a local first, SME first policy? And I'm saying this because we've had kind of experiments, if you want, with procurement for social value. They're not perfect, but there certainly is a signal and gives an incentive and strengthens local SMEs. And again, it may not be that you're just contracting with one SME. Maybe you can actually use that to create networks of SME that can then bid together.
Thank you so much. Anis, I wonder what are the measures you would like to place in the center of our conversation and our inspiration?
I think this is the most difficult question you could you could potentially ask, but maybe in line with the three major focus areas that I highlighted in the first part. Well, I believe that any type of investment in training, higher education, science, innovation is important, both to strengthen the human capital and increase the productivity of SMEs. As well as public sector, as I mentioned, certain things can be done, and many. Just for example, for instance, focus on inclusive entrepreneurship activities, or continued focus on the inclusive entrepreneurship activities, such as involving disabled groups, women as well, would be one activity to address the lack of labor issues by SMEs. Then one way perhaps to foster innovation and value added might be involvement of SMEs or fostering of involvement of SMEs in supplying to the defense industry, something that is an area that might desire more attention given the context, and also innovation support schemes could be used for this purpose. Value-added export activities of SMEs might also be fostered by supporting SMEs clusters, both locally and internationally, to strengthen the resource allocation and access to the resources. Well, without doubt, we need to continue. We will continue the focus on the green economy and the energy. And thus, the role of SMEs and the place of SMEs shouldn't be forgotten in this respect. So the policy package should have clear vision of SMEs versus the green economy issue, and how it's going to be integrated and achieved. The shadow economy, the tax evasion that I mentioned, the fighting the shadow economy without fighting entrepreneurship would be another policy area that would be constantly needed to be addressed, because many SMEs might be pushed into the shadow economy for different reasons. Thus, improvement of the context, adjustment of the context, given the situation, might be very, very important. And this is, finally, I think this is the last point. Indeed, I think that this policy package should consider the changes in the context, and thus, even though many support policies and mechanisms to support SMEs has been efficient, some of them should be perhaps reassessed. And I'm not only talking about the more standard or classical support schemes as different tax regimes or things like this. There are sometimes quite simple issues that, for instance, we observed in Latvia that would be needed in order to decrease some unnecessary bureaucracy. Just to give you an example, as we know, when the crisis comes, it does not hit all the sectors in the same way. So some sectors actually foster during the COVID crisis and other crises, whereas some are in very bad shape. So would it be possible, for instance, during the COVID crisis, for those running restaurants or hotels to rent out their employees easily without too much bureaucracy to the DHL type of companies, the companies that deliver to homes, and these are employees that require similar skill sets. They are service oriented, so on and so forth, right? And then sometimes that might help not to lose them a job for some time at least, and then when the crisis is over, they go back to the sector. So this bureaucracy, all these bureaucratic issues, efficiency of work issues, they are important also in general, but they are even more important in the context of crisis when resources are even more sort of crucial. So that's for me.
Thank you so much, Christina. I wonder, from the perspective of your company, but also the companies you know and have conversations with, what measures will actually make a difference and would also be those that you could reach out to and benefit from?
Yeah. So we came up with 3 that we think could really help the startups that we know and also ourselves. And they've actually been highlighted already at this conference, which was nice to see. The first is that we'd like to see more microgrants that are accessible to smaller companies. We'd like to see funds that are set aside in the relief package that can cover unpaid invoices. When companies go bankrupt, it ends up rippling through the economy. And the last thing is creating a sandbox for innovation. And yeah, the first one, the microgrants, there is a lot of funding that's accessible out there, that's public funding, but it is so resource intensive to apply for those grants, and they're huge sums of money. So it ends up being that it is large companies who have the resources and have the teams to set aside a full-time employee or maybe even a couple just to apply for these grants. So the small startups that are bringing a lot of innovation and are quite cost-effective, they don't actually have access to that money. So we'd like to see smaller grants that are less resource-intensive to apply for, that the smaller startups can actually access. And that's something that we faced many times. We saw grants that fit what we wanted to do, but we evaluated it, and there just wasn't the capacity on our team to spend that amount of time to apply for the money. The next thing is that we'd like, in the relief package, to have some funds set aside for invoices that aren't paid because companies go bankrupt. This is something that we faced, but it's often that larger companies that are providing goods and services, they're prioritized when a company is paying out the invoices. And they even sometimes have automatic payment schemes to make sure that their debt is paid back. And while invoices not being paid can really hurt a big company, it can kill a smaller SME. So yeah, we'd like to see some money that could go towards helping pay those unpaid invoices that ultimately end up getting paid, not getting paid. So actually, I'll just give an example. So we're working with restaurants. So during the pandemic, many restaurants ended up going bankrupt. And they had many invoices that weren't paid. And basically that meant that the suppliers, so it could have been the farmers or whatever small provider gave the goods or the services, it could have been fish, vegetables, whatever they were giving, they didn't get those invoices paid back, so they essentially provided those goods for free, and they had to take on that debt themselves while the restaurants closed down. And that rippled through the economy down to the small farmers on the local farms. They just basically had to absorb that debt because there wasn't something in place to help that out. So yeah, we'd like to see some money set aside to help pay those bills that don't get paid when a company goes bankrupt. And then the last thing is we'd like to see a sandbox for testing out innovation. And yeah, I guess the problem here is that there are a lot of outdated rules that have good intentions, but they end up blocking innovation. And we'd like to see a testing ground where the rules can be relaxed. And I'll give an example for that too. So our fishermen wanted to add or create a value-adding service, which was filleting on the boats. So that it didn't need to go to a factory somewhere to get processed. They could actually do it themselves, and they could take that extra earning. But the regulation says that they would need to be under a different industry code in order to do that. And that means essentially starting another company, doing all this extra paperwork, and it was a huge barrier for them to get into that. So we ended up having to bring it somewhere else, and we ended up filleting it ourselves. But it would have been a really nice setup if the fishermen could have done that. And if we could have a grace period where those rules are kind of relaxed, just to test out things and see, does this work? Is it bringing value? There was a reason that rule was put in place, and it was to make sure that the hygiene levels were high in the processing of fillets, but it didn't take into account that there were smaller companies and entities that have the ability and the hygiene to be able to do that, and maybe they could have an extra license instead of needing an entire new company and to go through that process. So yeah, a relaxed period for testing new innovations and solutions.
This is becoming very interesting and very practical. So I'm wondering, Benedetta, what would you like to add?
Yeah, well, I thank you, everybody, because I think that a lot has been put on the table, and I completely agree with kind of everything that's just been said. But I'm going to just very quickly underline what I believe. I think I will never underline enough, which is simplifying. And you have already said that, but talking to small and medium enterprises like every day, we really see these entrepreneurs like putting a lot of time, investing a lot of time in documents, papers, rules, norms. And we understood, especially after COVID, we already knew that, but we understood that the digital and sustainable transition is not negotiable anymore, but it takes time. And so we have to empower the small businesses, like investing the time in the right direction. So I think simplifying is definitely key. Then I love to see a stronger bond between university incubators and new entrepreneurs, because we really need young minds and fresh minds to keep on growing and making, our startup and SMEs landscape flourishing. But for that, it's really important to give basic skill sets to become an entrepreneur, because from my experience, I got it, it's a journey. It's always, every day you make mistakes and you learn. But we unfortunately saw a lot of business, not a lot, but a few businesses like shutting down because the crisis really not hit the business, but hit the problems that the business had, because the entrepreneurs lacked some skills. And so they kind of like bought the fairy tale of, oh, I've got a great idea, let's start this, business, but it's not as easy as it seems. So I think that especially talking the topics of women and inclusivity, starting from university. So when you have got a lot of ideas, if there was like a stronger help in trying to provide basic skill sets to start a business, that would be definitely helpful. And then something I really believe in, which is getting more international. We are so lucky to live I live in Italy, and we are so lucky to live in countries that are part of this great, European Union. And I think small and medium enterprises are not taking advantage, or they are not supported enough in getting international and trying to, to connect to other entrepreneurs, but also other clients in other countries within the European Union. So I think that any kind of supports, like to get from day zero, these small businesses to get international, that would be a great benefit for everybody.
Thank you so much. Gerardo, I'm wondering if there are any questions online that you might want to share with us.
No, for the moment.
If online, that's actually wonderful, because that gives us an opportunity to ask the audience here and see if there are any questions here. I would like to maybe, exactly, the person next to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Similar to our earlier speaker, in Dublin, we are also matching our
students, our master's students from 3 universities with our micro enterprises and our social enterprises, and we're really seeing the value that that exchange brings, and very interesting to hear the discussion and online too about the reverse mentoring. But one of the supports we're looking at is to enable the micro enterprises to hire graduates into their business and to give them financial support to do that. And I'm just wondering, do people feel as part of the broader support packages to enable small businesses to hire graduates can be an accelerant in the digital journey, the green journey, and would this be a practical support that's maybe worth examining? Thank you.
I wonder who of our panelists would be interested to contribute to that?
So I can just, intuitively, yes, I think we see the value of that. King's similarly, brings together SMEs and students. We have a big accelerator, and there's much to be said for aligning the two. I think one of the benefits is, and I think we have to communicate that to graduates also maybe more clearly, so us as educators, that an SME probably offers you much more diverse and interesting work than you would have in a large company. But of course, there is a ceiling effect in terms of career progression. And so it's a bit of a trade-off. And I think we need to be honest to people that that's what they're facing so that they can make an informed choice. But on the other hand, I do think, I don't know whether there's evaluations in terms of returns on investment, but I would think it's a pretty straightforward kind of win-win situation that if we could support that, especially because graduates may feel they take a salary hit if they go to work for an SME, if there could be some alternative offering, it doesn't need to be money. Often, at that stage in your career, learning and opportunities are more important. So, yeah, I don't have a clear mechanism, but I think it's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Also look into our online panelists, Alfredo and Arnis, if any of you would like to contribute.
Yeah,
Please go. Okay, thanks. Well, I agree. This cooperation, the strengthening of this mechanism in general is a good idea, and this is not something really new. It has been going on for a long time, and I think also the graduates understand much more. I remember when I started teaching entrepreneurship like 15 years ago, more people, more students were interested in going to work for big companies, and these days it's much more being entrepreneurs themselves. So there is a clear shift as I see it. Maybe one of the ways to strengthen this mechanism could be that the universities. I think for at this stage to try to formulate this and to make it as short as possible, the current approach is that as a professors, as a universities, we kind of have more of this approach that we can help to SMEs and how we can help to SMEs. Mm-hmm. I think we should realize much more that SMEs can actually help us in terms of doing what we are doing. And with this shift of the mindset, and we talked about the mindset previously, I think this could strengthen this cooperation and also this mechanism in general, how SMEs and universities interact. So this could become much more like a two directions process, as I think. But it's easier to say than do this, of course. A bit of proactivity also for SMEs and understanding of the academia should also be sort of involved.
Thank you so much, Alfredo.
Yes, I teach a course called The Management of SMEs, exactly that. And on the first lecture of this course, I bring the students to reflect on the fact that too often in universities, business schools, SMEs are stigmatized because it's true that, most of the universities and business school until a few years ago, not too many years ago, were only focusing on the type of large corporations rather than SMEs. So I think, I totally agree with what has been said before, but I also think it's important to convey to our students, which in the end are, some very important stakeholders besides the entrepreneurs and the policymakers, of course, that the type of career that you can have within an SMEs is just different but it's not per se something that is better or worse than the one that you have, in a large company. I think, on the one hand, it's true. If you look only on the financial side of the coin, probably a large company might be seen as a place where you have, higher return. But at the same time, in an SMEs, you have very often, a very high potential for growth. And when a company grows, of course, you grow with the company. You have a broader exposure to a number of things, so you are less specialized, which, can be per se a value. And, most importantly, also there is the social, goal. And the social goal is that we know that unfortunately, or fortunately from my perspective, SMEs are the backbone of the economy. So in Europe and in many other, geographical landscape. So, I try to make them reflect that, working for an SMEs is something that can be very valuable. And also, that if they help SMEs to prosper across generations, to prosper in the long term, they are really contributing to society, because our society, and this is something, that research shows, are very much affected by the presence of SMEs. Indeed, before it was said that, we should, besides working on supporting startup, also to be working on, valorizing, let's say, the potential of existing organizations. This was mentioned by Ute. I think this is, very, very, very important, because if we consider the number and therefore the effects on economic and social growth that depends on numbers, I'm afraid, we cannot deny that, of course, helping existing firms to prosper across generations and, trying to protect what has been built in many cases since many generations, it's very, very important, and has a huge effect on economic and social growth.
Thank you so much. I wonder if any of our entrepreneurs would like to add anything to this one.
Yeah, I can say something about our context. I think we're located in Denmark, and the Danish state does have certain programs and stipends to help connect students with startups, and it's definitely been beneficial for us to not have to pay a full salary for somebody to come on board and be our team, and it's usually very passionate people who want to work in startups. So I think they self-select themselves that way. But I think it's also really valuable for the students. They either end up becoming like a co-founder, taking on a co-founder role, or being an integral part of the team. And a lot of them, they get to really see what is involved on a very practical level in a startup, and they often go on to start their own startup. And in the Danish system, we have a lot of incubators where you get free office space and you get connected with experts. And I think that's it's definitely something that they're investing in. And I think it has a really big value to kind of provide the safety net for trying out new things and fostering innovation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can just add, that the work cost, it's like the lower the better all the time. And there's a huge difference in this case, I think, between startups and SMEs, because in startups, actually, students can really grow, learn a lot of things, and can, get really becoming a co-founder or a CEO, or they can really scale their business career. While in this small and medium enterprises is different. Maybe, climbing the ladder is kind of more difficult or even impossible. But then we have got some great example of people that are after university, they started working in a small business, and then they become the owner after a dozen a year. So it's it depends on what the students want. Definitely, reducing costs is helpful for us. But as was said, it's really important to describe these differences as well, because we have to know which kind of jobs we are applying to. Let's say. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sabine, I'm turning to you, our graphic recorder. I know you're in the middle of doing your recording, but you always provide this very interesting window for us as audience to be able to connect to the larger picture and the patterns and the trends that you have spotted. Would you be able to share anything with us? It's you know, like you have to know, like it's drawing and listening and then suddenly switching and shifting to okay, you know, and now we share. We can have a look at the large screen here.
Exactly. So it's good that technology works and helps us. Digitalization helps us also here. What I have observed is with just witnessing, it's the third panel, like you said, Carolina, and it's this coming together from the experts, really, this from the different perspectives, but the core is getting really one. Mm-hmm. So it's really about diversity and how diversity can support the resilience and what we are learning through these crises here. And it's super interesting to hear the young entrepreneurs' voice and how they have, what they are facing and how they are solving and offering solutions for us. So that's one thing. And I find these ideas around the relief package super intriguing because they have this diversity in it. Yeah, I leave it there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Our dear audience, you know we're turning to you. We close the questions and answers, but we're actually opening the floor to you, to your conversations and your contributions as well. And we would like to encourage you now to take around 10 minutes to have conversation in smaller groups. And I'm going to offer you 2 questions at once to anchor the conversation. And the first question, if we could see it also here on the prompter, is what would be the right measures for you to bring to the relief package? So the question behind that is, what are the conversations that are happening there where you are based? What is it that you're hearing people are discussing? And maybe what is it that you're hearing that people are not discussing, but should be discussing, because this should be included? So we really want to open our conversation to that. And I want to add the second question right away for you as well, is if we can go to the second question as well for the second round. If these measures that you're discussing would be included, what needs of the SMEs would they actually allow to answer? Yeah, so we're going to leave these questions here on top. So what are the measures that are being discussed? And we're beginning this collective conversation. And also connecting these measures to the needs of SMEs. If these were really included, what are the needs that SMEs have that would be met by that? And I encourage you to huddle in groups of 2 or 3, preferably people that you haven't talked to before. And if you're sitting on a lonely island, that might be a good moment to just change your seats. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes for that, and then we're going to come back to you. And we're going to have a conversation here on stage, and maybe our panelists online can have a Zoom conversation with each other.
Sure.
Let's take this one. So I would like to wrap up our conversations, not because I want to finish them, but because we would like to have a look inside of your conversations. And we want to do it in 2 ways. One of the ways is we would like to open our Slido. And this is the first time we're opening the Slido, but you're going to see it in various sessions throughout the assembly, because we really want to harvest, collect, and we want to find all of these answers in one place. And then we're actually going to, we're going to cluster them and share them with our colleagues at the Commission. So the question is, what concrete ideas would we like to put forward for the SME relief package? And tap with your badges. Thank you so much for role modeling over there. Scan the QR code and contribute your answers to Slido. We're going to see them showing up here. And Gerardo will pass through the room and give you an opportunity to just share very brief inspirations, and let's take it in a very dynamic pace, you know? So let's try to collect as many as possible. Gerardo, you're on it.
Thank you very much. We're coming from Greece, Academy of Entrepreneurship. We had an excellent discussion how we can train public employees of Europe, entrepreneurial skills and green skills, because it's an integral part of the SME ecosystem. So the administrative burden is not only about policies, it's about people. So if they think entrepreneurial, they will support the SMEs and the startups in the best way, especially public employees on local governments and municipalities. Thank you very much.
Perfect, and this is the question we're asking. How can we do that? So what we need from you is your ideas how to do that and how to support this. So when you're contributing your answers to Slido, give us ideas like microfinance for general working capital needs. Give us examples that are as concrete as possible. What other examples have you discussed in your tiny huddles? I can see a giggling huddle over there. Would you like to share something? Gerardo, there was a giggling huddle. I think they might something good. What? Is there anybody else that has any ideas? It's also okay, you know, like we're beginning. It's quite, you know, like it's maybe not early morning, it's almost 12, but we're beginning this conversation. So it's also, you know, like this is the time when they can be half-baked, where you can say, may I have an idea, but, you know, like it's just the beginning of the sentence. Can somebody finish the sentence for me? That's good. You've got something.
Well, we discussed the idea in the relief package to dramatically downscale the use of project-based funding in favor of automatic support based on performance, and it's in answer to the issue of microloans. So rather than making project-based funding more simple, smaller, let's just remove it, because the companies typically do not work on a project-based, but on a more long-term way of working. So let's make it automatic. Let's make greater use of automatic support based on performance, in a similar way that we see government helping the weakest population through automatic payment, like in Portugal, or in South Korea, when during the industrialization drive, the credit support was based on the export performance. And we could introduce similar measure for the green performance.
Thank you so much. Anybody else would like to share? Wonderful, thank you so much. We have a bunch of answers via our Slido. I really want to encourage you to also join us at the Ideas Lounge, where Sabina, Gerardo, Raquel, and myself will be to have conversations with you, to listen to you, but also whenever no one of us is there, you can use the opportunity and just drop your idea and be very anonymous about that. So we're going to be there throughout the whole assembly. Thank you so much. I'm passing on to Laila, my colleague, to wrap us up with the panel. And I'm not sure, Laila, if Laila is there. There you are. Wonderful. Welcoming you back.
Do we hear each other? Yes, we do. Carolina, thank you so much for passing me. Right? I do believe that it was the most inspiring session. And of course, thank you also, our three lady speakers. Thank you very much. Now we are going to have a network lunch. I hope that you will refresh yourself, because still there is a lot of sessions to follow afterwards. Just briefly, there is in D34 a policy workshop entitled Aerospace Technology and Data Opportunities for SMEs. In room D89, we have a policy workshop on innovation procurement. And please don't be afraid when you see ladies. I'm thinking two ladies coming with a camera. They are our rowing reporters. They are really nice. They don't bite, and they're ready for comments on the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your networking lunch and see you later.
Thank you so much.